The first great civilization of the Americas lasted 2,000 years. In Central America, at the southern end of the Yucatan Peninsula, which is the southeastern tip of Mexico, were the Mayans. Mayan life was at its peak from about 250 to 900 Common Era. The Mayans farmed using a slash and burn technique. The slashing was cutting down trees. The burning was setting the tree stumps on fire. The ashes were used as fertilizer for new crops on the cleared land. The Mayans successfully grew many crops, from beans to papayas to avocados, and most commonly, maize, or corn. But the slash and burn farming technique wore out the soil, and after a few years, farmers had to start over with a new plot of land. Some historians think this is one reason Mayan civilization began to crumble around 900. It may also have been from war, drought, disease, or any number of things. The Mayans created large temple pyramids in present-day Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Mexico. Side note, the Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas were all polytheistic. Back to the reading. They topped the pyramids with shrines to the gods and surrounded them with other temples and temples and palaces. The Mayans believed all life came from the hands of divine powers. They sometimes held festivals in honor of the gods and offered the gods human sacrifices. Planning religious festivals was helped by their development of a calendar based on the seasons. They also developed a system of hieroglyphics, writing in books made from the bark of trees. Side note, another incredible achievement of the Mayans, the cultivation of chocolate. They grew coca, growing coca trees, and made chocolate beverages. They even used coca beans as money in markets. The Aztecs, Mexico and Central America. In 1325, the Aztecs built their capital on a swampy land in the middle of Lake Texcoco in what was now known as Mexico City. They chose this island based on the ancient prophecy that said that Aztecs would find the site of a great city where an eagle perched on a cactus growing out of a rock. The Aztecs believed they were following their gods' orders when they saw this occur at this site. The Aztecs conquered nearby lands and created an empire stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. It was one of the largest cities of its time. The island city was connected to the land by causeways. Aqueducts were built to bring in fresh water. Canals were used to transport produce to the city's marketplace. Schools and large temples were constructed, and yearly calendar was created. Hieroglyphics were used for record keeping. Side note, causeway, raised streets of hard earth. The Aztecs worshipped a sun god because they believed this god would bring good harvests. And they also believed that the sun god would rise only with the strength from human blood. The Aztecs faithfully sacrificed humans for the sun god. To them, a few deaths were worth it to protect all their people. No sun, equals no crops, and hungry people. The Aztecs made it easier on themselves by sacrificing people from other tribes. Prisoners from battles and conquests were the most common sacrificial offerings. However, the constant need to capture new prisoners weakened the empire and caused other tribes to hate the Aztecs. Side note, in 1978, hundreds of years after Mexico City was built, major excavations began in the city, uncovering ruins like the Templo Mayor. A number of artifacts were also discovered. Another side note, within the side note, excavation, unearthing, or digging. In 1519, the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez arrived. He and his troops fought the Aztecs with the help of tribes that hated the Aztecs. By 1521, the battles and the diseases the Spanish had brought made it too hard to keep fighting. Montezuma, the Aztec emperor, surrendered at the Spanish-built Mexico City over the city of Tenochtitlan, spelled Tenochtitlan. The Incas, Incas, South America. Around 1200 CE, the Incas settled into a small village high in the Andes Mountains called Cuzco, which means center, in what is now Peru. 200 years of conquering other people and their lands led to the creation of an empire that was home to as many as 12 million inhabitants and stretched 2,500 miles from one end of South America to the other. Crossing the Andes Mountains, Cuzco would eventually become the capital of this empire. Keeping order in the empire so populated and spread out was challenging, so the Incas developed a census to record who worked on which projects and to make sure everyone paid taxes. Side note, census, an official count of the population. The Incas kept track of things by using a quipu, spelled Q-U-I-P-U, a group of knotted strings in which each knot stood for something like death, harvest, birth, etc. Colors were used to show different events, and knots were different sizes to show quantity. Since the Incas did not have a written language, messages were sent by runners across the empire carrying quipus to keep the government up to date. Runners often ran up to 20 miles per day. Side note, The U.S. has a census too. Every 10 years, it counts and surveys each person to note changes in the American population and make decisions about federal funding. The Incas are known for their mountaintop buildings, huge walls, and thousands of miles of paved roads. Many of their buildings still stand today, created with only stone hammers and bronze chisels. For example, Machu Picchu is a 15th century Inca estate you can even walk around in. The Incas built terraces for farming, and they built aqueducts to carry water to their farms. Side note, terraces, ledges cut into the mountainside to hold soil in place for farming. In the 1530s, the powerful Inca Empire ended with the arrival of a Spanish conquistador named Francisco Pizarro. The Incas were just coming out of a civil war when Pizarro arrived. The Spanish had horses, iron, and weapons unlike anything the Incas had ever seen. And they brought diseases like smallpox and measles, which the icons had never before encountered. These factors helped the Spaniards take over.